When it comes to the developments in Ukraine, one topic overpowers all of the rest, and that is military assistance. From the U.S., who is leading in arms and weapons assistance, benefiting the U.S. arms manufacturers, to NATO member countries. Brings about the question, is the U.S. pressuring these countries to follow its anti-Russia policies? While at the same time, some EU countries, while voicing their all-out support for anti-Russian sanctions, continue to buy Russian oil, and in particular gas. This edition of the Spotlight will be focusing on those issues. But first, let me introduce our guests. Anti-war activist Cindy Sheehan joins us from Sacramento, California. Also joining us, writer and political analyst Gearóid Ó Colmáin joins us from Cork, Ireland. Okay, I'd like to welcome to you both. And Cindy Sheehan, let me first start with you, if I may. And out of the things that are pretty much dominant these days when it comes to the military operation or war in Ukraine, are the military sales. I mean, we just keep hearing about military sales, left, right, and center seems to be the focus. The latest, the U.S. President Joe Biden, which stood out in terms of the highlight, if you want to call it, this Lockheed Martin company facility in Alabama, and then thanking the workers there and keeping up with the orders. Why is the U.S. is not obviously keeping that behind closed doors anymore? It's out for that. What is your impression of the U.S. intention here?
Well, I mean, the U.S. intention against Russia and Putin has been evident for many years, but especially since 2014, when the U.S. and its envoy, State Department envoy, Victoria Nuland, in 2014 supported the neo-Nazi takeover of the Ukrainian government and the evident Russia gating, saying that Putin was responsible, or Russia was responsible for Trump, that has turned out to be an absolute lie. And the one thing that we've noticed here in the United States, I never needed it to be evident, is that the one thing that the United States still manufactures is weapons, and it's the leading arms dealer around the world. And it's sending billions of dollars in military aid to Ukraine, which of course is a U.S. proxy war against Russia, just like the in the 70s with President Jimmy Carter and Brezhnev. That was a proxy war in Afghanistan against the USSR. And so to talk about how much money the arms industry is getting, the military industrial complex in the United States, is of course a terrible thing when we're here paying so much money for gas and groceries, and there's hyperinflation just coming out of the lockdown. Our economy is getting worse and worse, and it's still the case of a few profiting and a lot of people in misery. And the bad thing is, the Ukrainian people are caught in the middle of this, and you know, the U.S. Political class and military-industrial complex, plus its supporters in the grassroots, are willing to let this go to the last Ukrainian sacrifice. And that's the sad thing about it. And I'm sitting here, I have, you know, children and grandchildren and a community that I love, and the whole world could be affected by World War III. And this continuous push to arm Ukraine and to demonize Russia is not going to end well for anybody unless people step in and say, we need a negotiated ceasefire right now, and then talk about the terms of that, so it doesn't escalate further into something worse than it is right now.
Well, unfortunately, if you have the weapons flowing, it's just going to continue, Gearóid Colmáin.
Absolutely, that's right.
Yeah,
right.
Gearóid Colmáin, that's the logic behind weapons. They keep flowing, war will continue. And what was very shocking, in a sense, is what this Lockheed Martin Raytheon spokesperson actually said. These two military manufacturers actually make the weapons that many of these countries that I'm about to ask your reaction to. And this spokesperson said, we are exploring options to more quickly replenish U.S. inventories and backfill depleted stocks of allies and partners. One thing that many people don't realize is that the military equipment that NATO member countries actually purchase are from the U.S. So, and here we have the NATO countries, in this particular case, Lockheed and Raytheon spokesperson saying that, you know, we can't fill up the orders as they're coming through. How big a drive is military sales in this conflict?
Well, certainly the goal of the US geopolitically is to divide to separate the European peninsula from the Eurasian landmass. And the key point, the key pivotal point there is Ukraine, because that's the separation point where they can basically separate the Eurasian landmass, Russia and China, from Europe, which is essentially a peninsula. Now, of course, there's a question about where Europe starts and ends. The Russians see Europe as going from Lisbon to Vladivostok. But the Americans want the European peninsula to be a client state, so a unified client state of the United States. And this has always been the policy. So they need to stop Russian oil going into Germany and fueling a German industry. The arms sales, of course, is how you basically make this work. I mean, the US has been putting military bases all around Russia and China for many years, and they need to maintain the global military. This is the new Roman Empire, and of course, like the Roman Empire, it's falling, it's crumbling, and it's taking everybody with it. So right now in Europe, we're all paying the price for this crazy policy. It's become almost obligatory to support Zelensky. It's almost obligatory to be pro-Ukraine. They have Ukrainian flags virtually everywhere in Europe now, in schools. Everybody's gone around with Ukrainian flags. So we've been subject to a major brainwashing campaign in the media to demonize Russia and to eulogize Ukraine, of course, ignoring the presence of neo-Nazi shock troops in Ukraine, atrocities being committed on a daily basis. And of course, they have been committed for many years now, since 2014. I mean, I could mention some of them, such as the burning people alive in Odessa in 2014, one of the worst massacres possibly since the Second World War anywhere in Europe, completely ignored by the Western media. So these are the kind of people, you know, the arms are going to. This is what this industry, the military-industrial complex, is funding. And the British are very involved, of course, and the French. So these are the key allies of the United States, and perhaps more than allies, puppet states at this stage of US foreign policy. And so the US simply wants to continue that Mackinder-inspired policy of dividing the Eurasian landmass. And the key point there is Ukraine, because it is that point which, from the North Sea to the Black Sea, where the United States can basically militarize that zone and then create a sort of an intermarium where Russia is blocked from Europe. Of course, the consequence of that is that we're paying higher fuel costs. We're paying, everything is going up. So, you know, what it will do essentially to the ordinary worker in Europe is bankrupt him. Middle class and working class people will be bankrupt. Businesses will go bankrupt because they cannot keep up with the prices. We have a situation in Ireland, for example, where farmers now have to get loans to get fertilizer. So sooner or later, this is going to crack. The question is when. But you know, it will also lead to a food crisis, I think, because food prices are already going up. Germany is already experiencing a food crisis.
Yeah, we're going to get into that in a bit in terms of
I think the damage is going to be enormous.
Sure. Well, let's try to get a clearer picture over here as to what's really happening, Cindy Sheehan. I mean, when we talk about the fact that you have NATO member countries and European countries in particular coming out condemning Russia, some analysts are saying that that's due to U.S. pressure. Now, how is the U.S. pressuring these countries? Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but the U.S., through Zelensky now, because I recall distinctly that Zelensky said that other European countries could become a target. And that's the line, one of the lines that the U.S. is pushing in order to get them to cooperate and move ahead with sanctions, move ahead with military assistance. Because there's a void, not only in their own security apparatus through their armies or what have you, but their reliance, because they're a NATO member, of the alliance as a whole. Is that a correct way of depicting this?
Yeah, the U.S. is very famous for using the stick threats, but also the carrot, the promise of, contracts, oil contracts, money, aid. Most of the aid that the U.S. gives, as you mentioned, is military aid. So it's like we're giving money to countries that are going to come right back to the defense contractor. So it's almost like a welfare for the defense contractors to send this aid to NATO and NATO countries that comes back to them to fill their coffers. And so there's always the stick and the carrot in U.S. foreign policy, but it seems like the carrots are also, not very healthy, not very, very positive things. And I agree with the other guest here in the United States. The fear propaganda is out of control. With Putin is another Hitler, and he's going to not stop in the Ukraine. What we saw and what we've been watching very closely since 2014 is that Russia has, with Putin at the head, has shown an extreme amount of restraint in dealing with this Ukrainian issue. Your other guest mentioned the burning of the Union Hall in Odessa, but since 2014, the neo-Nazi sympathizers in the Ukrainian military have been killing people in Lugansk and Donetsk in the Donbas region, between 14 and 20,000. And I just wonder what the U.S. would do if Mexico killed 20,000, Mexico, the country, the government of Mexico, killed 20,000 U.S. citizens, like in Baja California. Would the U.S. wait 8 years for a military response? And, I doubt it. So Russia, like your other guest said, is feeling surrounded by the U.S. and NATO countries. And I'm just wondering what their response should have been and what other countries would have done in that same circumstance.
It seems like the rhetoric coming from the U.S. in particular, leading the pack, and then of course member countries, but in particular the U.S., Gearóid Ó Colmáin, is very harsh, and it's almost like taunting and provoking Russia in new ways. For example, very interesting that you have a headline reading U.S. intelligence is helping Ukraine kill Russian generals, and then you have the details come out that this may have led to 12 Russian generals to be killed, which was a target on that ship, to be one of them. And then you have Biden saying, these types of leaks should not come out from U.S. officials. It's almost as if he's mocking the fact that this happened. Not mocking, but by saying that, it's provoking Russia. Also, other news where U.S. is training Ukrainian troops in Germany, and that may be going on in other parts of Europe, of which John Kirby said we can't disclose those locations yet. Is the U.S. trying to elevate this war to another level?
They've been provoking Russia since way before 2014. I mean, it erupted in 2014 with the coup. But since then, they've been hoping for this war. It's not that they don't want the war. Russia doesn't want the war. Russia never wanted the war. It never wanted the coup in Ukraine. It never wanted the entire crisis. This is a pain this is a major crisis for Russia itself, and it doesn't need this crisis. Russia has enough problems to be dealing with. Look, they've been provoking wars on the periphery of Russia for a long time, with color revolutions all over Eastern Europe, Georgia, recently in Kazakhstan. And so they're destabilizing the entire periphery of Russia, Eastern Europe, right into Central Asia. And the aim of this is to provoke world war, essentially. Now, we're in a situation of world war. If you're at war with Russia, and we are at war with Russia, it's a world war, because of course it will involve all of Russia's allies, China, Iran. Everyone will be drawn into this. because of the global repercussions. And we're in, I would say, the phony war phase of a world war. In other words, it's sanctions, economic crisis, percolating crisis, destabilization, escalation, and so on. We haven't yet gone into full-scale war where the Russians are retaliating. Of course, the West are actually prepared to provoke Russia into full-scale retaliation. We have people like Nancy Pelosi in the United States saying that it's okay if we go to full-scale nuclear war with Russia. Of course, that means that nuclear missiles will fall, will hit America and kill Americans. So she doesn't seem to be too bothered by that. They seem to be prepared to go for a full-scale nuclear war with Russia. That will end very badly for Europe and possibly for the United States, but it will certainly wipe out several cities in Europe should the Russians be forced to retaliate. Now, I doubt very much that the Russians will hit Europe first. I think that if Russia is hit, if Moscow is hit, if they cross the border into Russia and start targeting Russian cities, then Russia, of course, will retaliate and European cities will be hit. And, this is where we're at now. And this is a world war. It's the first, we're in the preliminary stages of a world war. Russia hasn't crossed the border yet, but I could see this, escalating, and they certainly want it. This is the problem here. They're not talking about negotiation. They're not talking about reestablishing the Minsk Accords. The door is always open. The Russians have had a very intelligent foreign policy in this regard, because Alexander Lukashenko in Belarus has kind of played the role of intermediary, and it has worked well for Russia, but also for anyone who actually wants to negotiate with Russia. So the door is open for negotiation, but the West doesn't want negotiation. They want full-scale war. It seems that they're prepared to go as far as nuclear war, which of course is a situation of mutual annihilation. But we're living in very disturbing times, and we're ruled by insane elites. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. These people are mentally insane. Biden is mentally insane. Pelosi is insane. So this is the scary thing. Right now in Europe, there is, of course, a major division between the hardcore belligerents and those who are more inclined to favorable diplomacy with Russia, such as Hungary, Czech Republic, Serbia, and so on. And of course, that is a major weakness. I think a lot of people want to get out of this. They see that there's no point in pushing Russia any further.
Sure. Well, I mean, when we want to take a look at the intentions that the sanctions had, Cindy Sheehan, the ruble has actually recouped most of its losses based on the report that I read. It's become the top performing currency globally, and it continues to gain, and it's up 60%. Looking at its performance for the month of March. If you want to take a look at the Russian gas deliveries via Ukraine, it's hit a 5-month high, and there are 10 European countries that are quietly buying Russian gas, even though the EU has come out and said that it's banned. I mean, you can't buy Russian gas. So the intended results are not, they don't have that maximum impact when it comes to sanctions. But what is having an impact is the material or the information that you gave us, Cindy Sheehan, from your part of the world in Sacramento, of which you're looking at high prices, inflation, stagflation maybe. The U.S. may be heading towards a recession. 1.2% contraction was recorded. You have things like what's happening in Europe with energy costs and people who are obviously suffering. And it's really sad to see it's mostly really the poor who are suffering the most out of this. And the list goes on and on. So is the world suffering because of what is happening based on the U.S. leading the pack into this?
I think that this is like the culmination of U.S. foreign policy, especially since 9/11, 2001. And I see that, yes, people here in the United States are suffering economically, and they're not putting together that the sanctions and the reliance on this destructive military-industrial complex industry is harming everybody from, babies to old people. And so they're not putting two and two together. They've been told, as your other guest said, that nuclear war is winnable and survivable. And so there's a situation in the grassroots where half of the people that align with the Democratic Party are believing this. And then we have the people on the right who have always been pretty war hungry, and they're couching their propaganda in terms of being, that this is a humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. And I know this is getting a little bit off the topic, but my energy always goes around what's happening to the people on the ground. So people are really sad, here in the United States for what's happening in Ukraine, not even taking a look or hearing about the U.S., Saudi Arabia, Israel, war against the people of Yemen, and that actual humanitarian crisis there, where hundreds of thousands of people have died from sanctions and bombing and things like that. So the military-industrial complex here, mostly in the United States, I say global imperialism led by U.S. imperialism. We do have a psychotic foreign policy. We have a psychotic government. We have a president who doesn't even know where he is half the time, who has his finger could be on the button of nuclear annihilation, which doesn't give me any, confidence. And so this is a bad situation where we're having all kinds of this patriotism here in the United States, but the patriotism is by flying Ukrainian flags. And so it is a very scary situation.
All right, unfortunately, we've ran out of time. Thank you so much for that, Cindy Sheehan, anti-war activist from Sacramento, California. Wish we had more time. Again, Gearóid Ó Colmáin, thank you for your input, writer and political analyst. And with that, we come to an end for this edition of The Spotlight. From Miko Atahwe and the team, it's goodbye until next time.